Last week, I reviewed The Banshees of Inisherin, and overall, it's a review that I wasn't happy with because in the end, a lot of the points I was trying to get across just didn't come across. A lot of jokes I was trying to hit didn't hit, and the main thing was it came across that I didn't enjoy the movie at all, and that's completely not what I meant by the review. I even gave it a very low 6 out of 10 rating, which I don't think is a fair reflection of my opinion of the movie, and I'm the sort of man who has no problem admitting I was wrong. The movie remained in my mind for the past 7 days. I've constantly been thinking about the movie, despite already getting the review out of the way, thinking about things I would say, and thinking about the overall movie as a whole. Ever since then, I've been watching various interviews with the stars of the movie, with the director of the movie. I've been studying more about the movie. I've even gone and watched the movie again. And what I've come to realize is that I was actually a little bit hasty with my initial review. I didn't take the time to allow the movie to stew over my brain for a couple of days and just figure out all the little details that were floating around in there. Because as I mentioned, the main problem I had with my own review of the movie is that I put across that I didn't enjoy the movie at all. Whereas that's not the truth at all. So with all that in mind, we're going to run it back and let's talk about The Banshees of Inisherin. The Banshees of Inisherin is a new Irish movie from director Martin McDonagh, who's previously brought us movies like Three Billboards and In Bruges, which is a fantastic Irish movie. Colin Farrell plays the protagonist of the story, Pádraic, a simple man who likes the simple things in life, who lives on an island off the west coast of Ireland, who likes nothing more than to sit down with his best friend at the pub for a bit of good chatting. However, he wakes up this day at the beginning of the movie to find that his best friend, played by Brendan Gleeson, Colm, doesn't want to speak to him anymore. It's not sort of, I don't want to speak to you for 5 minutes, or I don't want to speak to you for a little while because you've offended me. It's, I don't want to speak to you anymore ever again because you bore the hell out of me and you're holding me back. It was shot on some of the islands off the west coast of Ireland, in particular Inishmore and Achill Island, which we'll get into when we talk more about cinematography and the visuals within the movie. Interestingly as well, the movie was set in 1923 during the Irish Civil War. The Irish Civil War took place between June 1922 and May 1923. The film also stars Kerry Condon, Barry Keoghan, John Kenny and Pat Short, who'll be very familiar to a lot of Irish people out there. And I mentioned in my initial review last week that Barry Keoghan for me is the one that was the standout performer. He's the one that had me laughing the most. He's the one that for me had the best performance within the movie. However, it's Colin Farrell and it's Brendan Gleeson that are getting a lot of the praise. And that's one of the points I didn't like my initial review, is that I said they were good, but they weren't fantastic. I believe I said I've seen them better in other movies, and I would stand by that. I do think I've seen them better in other movies, but that by no means they weren't fantastic within this movie. So right from the beginning of the movie, you can tell something's not right, because Colin Farrell goes to Brendan Gleeson's house, sees him sitting inside, but he doesn't answer him, he won't speak to him. He asks him if he's going to the pub, he doesn't respond. And even the bartender at the bar finds it very unusual when Colin Farrell's character turns up by himself, which sets up the mystery of what's going on. Why won't they talk to each other? Why won't Brendan Gleeson speak to Colin Farrell? Surely there has to be something more to it. And that's one of the best parts of the movie. It's one of the reasons the movie flows so well, is because you're constantly guessing what's going to happen and where they're going with it. Now, as I stated in my initial review, the pacing of the movie is fantastic. It's an electric pace, and the 2 hours of the movie just whizzes by. Now, the basic story of the movie is quite simple. One friend doesn't want to speak to another, the other one doesn't know why, and it kind of changes his life overnight.
You do like me.
I don't.
You liked me yesterday.
Oh, did I? Yeah.
I thought you did.
He's gone from this happy-go-lucky guy who had everything going for him to all of a sudden being the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. His best friend won't talk to him, and furthermore than that, his friend is willing to self-mutilate himself to stop him from talking to him. Seems insane. Especially when Colm is getting on with everybody else in town quite fine. Now, as I mentioned, this movie is set on a fictional island off the coast of Ireland based on Inishmore and Achill Island and islands like that off the west coast of Ireland, which do have quite close-knit communities in it. Everyone on those islands knows everyone on those islands, and they know everything that's going on. The one thing I didn't like from my own review last week that I said was that there was no character development within the movie. That's one of the main things that, looking back on, was quite a stupid point to bring up, because it's not true at all. I was watching an interesting interview with Colin Farrell recently where he was speaking about his character and what he took away from his character and the development of his character throughout the story. Because at the beginning of the movie, Pádraic starts out as I mentioned a few times, a happy-go-lucky guy who's happy with his life of just going and sitting and speaking to his friend at the pub. He doesn't particularly have any ambition. He doesn't particularly have any goals. He just wants to spend time with the people he loves. And suddenly that's ripped away from him, causing him to question everything. And also he finds out that pretty much everybody finds him a little bit stupid, a little bit dull.
Colin was always more of a thinker.
Huh? Why is every... I think.
You're more one of life's good guys.
And very quickly he begins questioning everything and starts comparing himself even against the guy who's considered the stupidest kid on the island, leading to things like this.
Well, touche.
To what?
Touche, it's from the French.
And these are the reasons why you can see why people are saying Colin Farrell's performance is really strong in this movie. His little facial expressions and the way he conveys that idea of, oh crap, I might be stupider than the stupidest guy on the island. And it happens throughout the movie where Colin Farrell portrays things like that very, very well. By the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he becomes this guy who has to go to the most extreme levels. Instead of happily going to the pub with his mates, he's now willing to embrace violence. He's willing to burn down his best friend's house with him inside or without him inside. He's a man that loses everything along the way. He loses his best friend. He loses his sister who leaves. He loses his pride and joy, his pet donkey, or I guess just donkey that's going around. And he even loses his other friend, Barry Keoghan's character. And that amount of loss for Pádraic, our protagonist, did lead to one of my theories throughout the week. One of the theories I began dwelling on was perhaps Pádraic had died throughout the night, wakes up the next day, and the worst thing that could possibly happen to him is he loses his best friend while his best friend is still there within touching distance, which would kind of make sense in a way. You know, he wakes up into this hell for himself where his best friend is willing to self-mutilate himself rather than speak to him, who blames him for all his misgivings. And on top of that, he loses everybody close to him and anything close to him. But of course, we see various scenes throughout the movie where Pádraic isn't in them and people are speaking about him, where it's his sister speaking to Colm or other people speaking about him or speaking about him in the pub, which leads me to think that that theory doesn't hold much weight. But it is a theory I dwelled on for a few days. As I mentioned in my initial review as well, I had the idea that perhaps Colm was merely trying to push away his best friend so he wouldn't hurt him when Colm ultimately passes. But obviously that isn't the case either. But it is a movie that has a lot of potential for theories and speculation. I've seen that through other people's reviews. Everybody has an opinion of what's going on behind the scenes, what's the hidden story behind the main story. However, when you see Martin McDonagh in interviews and Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, they all heavily focus on the main story, which is about friendship and loss and all that. And Brendan Gleeson's character is quite interesting too, because he's the man who wants to leave a legacy. He wants to leave something behind. He doesn't want to be forgotten when he's gone. And he blames Pádraic for being the reason why he hasn't achieved anything yet, whether that be with his music or anything else. He blames Pádraic taking up so much of his time and wasting a lot of his time on mindless chatting, as he puts it. And that's the reason why he hasn't written this grand piece of music yet. One of the interesting things Brendan Gleeson said in an interview about his role, he compared his character wanting to just be left alone while he writes his music to James Joyce. James Joyce supposedly left Dublin because he was afraid of speaking away all of his stories, which is a very interesting comparison. Colm in this, he doesn't want to waste his time that he could be using for making something that could stand the test of time. Instead, he wants to focus all his energy on writing music, something that people could pass on down the generations so he will always be remembered, which is interesting. However, as I mentioned in my initial review, he does end up biting off his nose to spite his face by cutting off his own fingers. A desperate man does desperate things, and there's clearly an element of mental illness there with his character. And you do have things within the movie, like the fact that he's cut off all his fingers, they're dripping with blood as he walks down the street, and yet he's not bleeding out and he's not getting any infections. I guess you just got to put that down to movie logic. Now, one thing I noticed with this movie is a lot of people in their reviews are saying the scenery is phenomenal, use of landscapes is sensational, and for me that's something I just didn't consider with my original review, because I'm Irish, I live in Ireland, I see this stuff all the time, and it's not particularly engrossing to me. But I can understand how other people could see that, you know, seeing the likes of Echo Island in a wide angle lens for the first time. It looks fantastic, but I kind of take it for granted. I'm sure other people in other countries do as well. For example, someone who lives near a desert, when they saw Dune last year, they probably weren't blown away by those amazing landscapes the way the rest of us were, who don't see that stuff all as often. You know, and perhaps that's my own fault for taking my own country for granted. But at the same time, what I will say is I don't particularly think this movie has any outstanding cinematography. I think the movie looks fine. You know, there's some very good shots. There's some very good use of landscapes, as people have said, wide angle lenses, just letting the island speak for itself. I don't think there's any particular shot that stands out from the movie as that was an amazing shot. But then again, this movie doesn't need amazing camera work, amazing trickery, because it's held heavily by the acting throughout the movie. Overall, the story within the movie I found to be quite engaging, quite engrossing, and keeps you guessing all the way through. But as I mentioned in my initial review last week, and I stand by this, I don't particularly think the ending was great. I think it could have been better. And interestingly, in interviews, Colin Farrell speaks a lot about how there was an initial draft for the movie, which involved shooting and more violence, and that would be interesting to see what the ending for that one would have been. But I guess they decided to just focus more on the characters and try to resolve it in a more natural way. It is a very Irish thing where you'll resolve a conflict by just standing beside someone for a few minutes and just going, all right, and walking away. You know, we're a very passive aggressive people. The interesting thing with this movie as well, it's quite a range of emotions in it, because there's times in the movie where you'll be laughing out loud, and there's also times in the movie where you might be horrified by the likes of Brendan Gleeson cutting off his fingers and seeing his hand with no fingers. And you'll also be sad for things that happen within the movie, like when his sister leaves, like when Pádraic loses everything. But also with Barry Keoghan's character. His character is so complex because he's this young, happy guy at the start who's just Pádraic's mate, who's trying to make him laugh, who's described as the village idiot. And that guy is going through so much. He's got an abusive father, physically, mentally, and later on we find sexually, which just makes your heart pour out for this young guy. And then later in the movie, when he talks to Pádraic's sister and she rejects him, you can see that despair on his face. And that's why I think Barry Keoghan's performance throughout the movie was one of the standout performances, in my opinion, rather than Colin Farrell or Brendan Gleeson, who I do think were fantastic as well, but I just think Barry Keoghan stepped out above those guys. Getting back to the ending, I do stand by my point that I think the ending could have been stronger, and I don't think the ending was great overall. However, the change in Pádraic, where he's not fawning over his friend anymore, he's been broken, he's gone to the end of his rope and he's not willing to take any more. His character at the end is so different from the character at the beginning of the movie in hindsight, because by the end he's a bitter man who's had everything taken away from him, and at the beginning of the movie he's just a happy-go-lucky guy who wants to have a few drinks with his mate at the pub. I've seen so much speculation across various reviews from people as to what's going on with it, people comparing the Civil War and people's reaction to the Civil War on the island to the reaction they've had between the, I guess, war between Colm and Pádraic, even though it's a very one-sided war for the most part. And it's the sort of movie where a lot of different people will infer a lot of different things from it. So ultimately, we get down to the rating, or should I say the re-rating, because one of the things I didn't like about my initial review is that I gave it a 6 out of 10, and I don't think that was fair at all for this movie. Now, I will stand by my point that I don't think this is the best movie of 2022. I don't think it's one of the greatest movies of the year. I do think it's a very, very good movie for the most part. I do think the ending could have been better, but I had a lot of fun with the movie. And I am going to boost my rating from a 6 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10 for this movie. I do fully think that this movie will get nominations for some of the big awards, and partially because Martin McDonagh is a very smart man who knows what the Academy look for. I think he's been very strategic in the way he's made this movie, and he's been very clever in some of the places he's put in place to attract the eye of the Academy. On top of that, Colin Farrell is fantastic, Brendan Gleeson is fantastic, Barry Keoghan is fantastic, and even Kerry Condon is fantastic too. I don't know why I said even there, I just did. But I think this review has been a better reflection of my opinion of the movie. I think I let the movie down with my initial review. But let me know your thoughts on the Banshees of Inisherin in the comment section below. And if you want to check out my initial review that I posted last week for the movie and how different it is this review, it's right over here to check out. And of course, there'll always be another video over here to check out if you've already seen that one.